a guy living on an island that had a fishing boat. And he would just go out with his little canoe-like boat, fish off the shore, come back, and he'd have fish, cook it up over a campfire, and sit around with a bunch of friends, talk. And someday an Englishman came to him and said, "You're poor. You know what you need? You need to own several fishing boats and hire people out to go get more fish than you need and sell them at a marketplace and make a bunch of money and buy more fishing boats. And before long, you'll have a fleet of fishing boats. You'll be selling it all over the place. And then you can get some big shipping boats and you can start delivering it up the shore to the other islands around to make a whole bunch of money. And then you can own a business and travel around and the guy looked at him and asked, "Why?" He said, "Well, eventually, someday you can retire and move to a little island and go fishing." I grew up in California in a very materialistic, very narcissistic environment. Everybody was trying to keep up with everybody else as far as the material things that they possess. And there are certain expectations. If you don't have this and this and this, you're not valid. And I was taught that for most of my youth, and shamed that you don't have enough. But I found out that the economy is designed to make sure that we never meet those expectations, so that we always feel shame and not good enough. I went through 7 career changes. I did all kinds of things. I'm a creative person. Tried to figure out how can I do what I'm skilled at and get paid for it. I was an artist in high school. Well, everybody knows about the story of the starving artist. That's not going to work. Well, what about digital photography? So I got into that. I then realized that I need to know something about the internet, so I got into that. That was after the dot-bomb. Nobody's getting paid anything for doing that anymore, and the softwares were doing it for you. So that's not going to work. So then I needed to learn about all of the other parts involved in making the website. You got to know the database, you got to know the server programming languages, you got to know the transport protocols, you got to know the internet protocols, you have to know how things connect, you have to know about the operating systems and how they work. All of this for what? Ultimately, after every junior college class that I could take on the IT subjects, I knew all of these different things, and what good is to do? I finally got my foot in the door at a good job, $25 an hour, barely pays half of rent in an apartment in a place that I don't like living, and for that luxury, I had to live in a cubicle, literally lived in a cubicle for 7 years. Can't see when the sun comes up. Don't know whether the sun's up or not. And it's hard on your eyes. It's hard on your emotional well-being. Why is that? Because we're made to be in a place like this. We're made to breathe fresh air. Where does that come from? The trees and the water. There's something that ionizes the air, negative ions, around flowing water. If you're in a desert, there's no such thing. You end up all positively charged, and this has horrible oxidation effects on your body. This smells fresh. You can feel the coolness of it. It's very pleasant sitting next to the water. Not only that, but when the water goes across the rocks, it stirs it up in a way that makes structured water. So H2O molecules are like a V shape, and they float around like this. And And in all the textbooks, that's what we see. And we know that when it gets cold, it compresses, and when it gets hot, it expands. But what they don't tell you is that there's also structured water. When you take these and put them together in a hexagon shape, it makes a ring. And this ring becomes a gel-like substance. You see this growing on the rocks in some places. You see this on the tree where it gets slippery after it's been wet. It's structured water. That's something that's very special. Apparently our arteries are lined with structured water, and we don't get that in our drinking water because we used to drink out of a creek like this. After it runs down the rocks, it would structure the water like that. And we, like all of the rest of the animals, would drink right from this before all the pollution. So there came a time when I understood that our economy is literally designed, thought out, designed to prevent us from success. Specifically to put us down so that only a few people are successful and they take over the world. Everybody else is a peasant class working for them. Why? To try to meet the expectation that we're told makes us good enough. Why do we need that to be good enough? This is how life is supposed to be. So I moved up to Washington. Now this is where I live. One of the most gorgeous places on the face of the planet. The only rainforest that's not in the tropics. Not a whole lot to eat by foraging, but there's a lot of medicines in the forest. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I lived in this. I froze to death trying that. You gotta have shelter. I have a house. I have a garden. And that's what I'm focused on now, is the garden. How is mankind supposed to live? You're supposed to grow your own food. You're supposed to store your own food to make it through the winter. You're supposed to use your creativity to fix problems that you have, whatever those problems may be. And people used to have the ingenuity to be able to invent things as they needed them. You need fire? Well, you got flint and steel, you got rubbing sticks together, you got bow drills, you got batteries on a piece of aluminum foil. I mean, you can get creative. But you have to think about it. You have to work those skills to be there. The average person that has lived in a cubicle their whole life, they don't have any skills. They don't know anything about filtering water. They don't know anything about where their food comes from. They don't understand that 95% of the U.S. food supply is poisoned with known carcinogens from Monsanto, who was bought out by Bayer, who makes chemotherapy. So they're giving us cancer and then selling us chemotherapy, which does not heal cancer, it causes it. You give chemo to somebody that doesn't have cancer, they will get cancer because of the chemo. But they don't let you know that, because it's illegal, because there's so much money involved. So I live in a world where human lives don't matter to humans. I live in a world where people pollute something so gorgeous as this, to where the water's not drinkable. Why? Because they're taught to. Because they're not taught to think about it. They're not taught to care. The last few years of my life have been what some call a spiritual awakening, what others call a dark night of the soul. What does that mean? Well, when you start to really question all the fundamental beliefs of what you were taught growing up, like literally every single thing that you were ever taught has to be unlearned, to try to question what is real and find out that what's real is absolutely opposite of everything that I was ever taught. That's very disorienting. And it tends to make a person depressed for a while. It tends to make them give up on the things that obviously don't matter and start to question what really does. And then if you go into an isolation like a monk for a while, you find that your very definition of who you thought you were used to be dependent on what other people thought about you, used to be dependent on what you thought your place was amongst a social group of other people. If you ask somebody, who are you? They'll probably tell you, oh, I'm a plumber. Oh, I'm an engineer. Maybe they'll be proud to say, I'm a lawyer. There's no pride in that, and there's certainly not your identity. That may be what you do for money, but money does not define who you are. You are a person with a soul, with emotions, with creative thoughts and inspirations that can change the world if you applied yourself to that. But people are chasing pieces of paper at the expense of their life and their soul, and coming to identify who they are with how they make these pieces of paper. That's baffling. That's nonsense. But I'll tell you, when you isolate yourself away from all of these things that you thought mattered, you find out that first off they don't, and then you find yourself lost wondering, who am I? I'm not the job that I used to have. I'm not the job that I imagined having. That's not who I am. So who am I? This is called the dark night of the soul. Questioning everything, seeking to understand what is the spiritual essence of the meaning of life and the purpose for being on this earth. And I'll tell you, it's not about chasing little pieces of paper. I saw another story. This was a guy from Thailand, grew up in a little farming town, and he says they used to work the farm really hard from the time the sun comes up to the time the sun goes down for about 3 months out of the year. So at the beginning of the season, there's a whole bunch of planting, and then you wait. And then comes time for harvest. You got to put in a bunch of effort to harvest and put it into some storage mechanism to keep insects away and animals away. But other than that, most of the time he had was spent with community, with friends. They would all sit around in a circle and talk. And that was most of every day, was just socializing. Just like the previous story, some foreigner came to him and said, "You're poor. You know what you need to do? You need to go to college. You should go to the capital city of Thailand and pursue an education and then get a good paying job. And then you can pay for a house and you can buy food and then you'll be somebody." As if he wasn't already somebody. So he actually tried this. He went to Bangkok. He got into college. The college had him studying so much that he could hardly sleep. He couldn't eat. He started relying on restaurants, and he wasn't making money as a poor college student, so you can't even really afford the restaurants. And then you have to pay rent in an apartment, and the rent is more than you're going to make in most incomes. And he thought, what? He dropped out. He said, why am I doing this? And he went back to where he'd grown up. 3 months out of the year of hard physical labor, the rest of the year is socializing with friends and family. He said he's got a son that built him 3 houses with his own hands at 14 years old. Just by digging into the mud and building something with trees and packing the mud in with straw. 14 years old could build 3 houses with his bare hands. So why is he trying so hard to get a degree, to get money, to pay rent, when his 14-year-old kid could build him 3 houses and not have to work. Our culture has really gone astray from what it means to be human. What does it mean to be human? It's about trying to make a difference in people's lives. It's about trying to affect the world in a good way. I believe that God created all of this to sustain our bodies and put us on this earth to sustain this land. We are caretakers of the earth. Adam was put in the Garden of Eden to tend the garden. That's what mankind is for. That's what humans exist for. Not pieces of paper. At this time, the government wants to tell you that they know better than God what your body is supposed to have in it. When a child is born, the umbilical cord of the baby, before it's disconnected from the mother, has 236 toxins in it, 180 of which are carcinogens. Right upon birth, that's how much poison we're soaked in. Why? Because it's in the food? Because it's in the air? Because it's in the water? Why is that? Because they're trying to depopulate the earth. They're trying to kill off humanity. Except the richest of the richest who have the majority of the pieces of paper and are so arrogant that they think that they have value and others don't, because the value comes from the pieces of paper. When I started finding this out, I tried saving people's lives. I tried warning them. The food is poison. You need organic food. That's real food, not highly processed plastics. And they laughed and they mocked and they wouldn't listen. I had one friend. He told me, "David, you're trying to sell me that..." I'm like, what? No, I'm trying to save your life. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I don't value the pieces of paper. But his whole concept of reality was so much around these pieces of paper that me trying to warn him that the food is poison, he interpreted that as I'm trying to sell him something. And I was just so taken aback by this, I just couldn't even believe it. An inability to comprehend when somebody cares about your well-being versus trying to sell you something. Those are so radically, drastically different. It's just incomprehensible to me how somebody could not see that. But that's the world that we're living in. A culture that's completely confused about its priorities. So my priorities now are, who am I? Why am I on this earth? We have a limited lifespan. And with all of the craziness that's going on, it's not as much time as we think it is. So what are we going to do with that time? We will eventually have to stand before the creator of the universe and answer the question, what did you do with this life? Every moment that you had, every breath that you took was a precious gift of time for you to use wisely for something. What did you do with it? Assess what matters. Use that time wisely.